False Swipe Gaming, why Movepools are close to everything in competitive Pokemon. The Flareon Theorem.
The False Swipe Gaming Laboratory is here to posit another theorem for the theoretical sciences in the competitive Pokemon sphere. One that was also suggested by you, the viewer. We've gone over how stats aren't everything except for speed, which kind of can be everything.
Yes.
However, the only way speed can be of use no matter what is if the Pokemon in question has the move pool to take advantage of it. Nobody cares if your +6 speed Choice Scarf Magikarp is going first when it's just using Splash, for example.
Right.
But if it was using some move that currently doesn't exist, which let's say set Stealth Rock and Spikes at the same time, then it would be a big deal.
Yes.
That brings us to the subject of today's video, move pools, and how, while they aren't everything, they sure come close. It's not just in relation to speed either. Think of all the super strong or super bulky Pokemon which fail to do anything of note because they don't have decent moves to use once they hit the field. An amazing move pool can easily compensate for a Pokemon lacking in other areas. Conversely, a Pokemon with great attributes but lacking a move pool is often left out to dry. This is what we're covering today, and what we will now refer to as the Flareon Theorem. With move pool updates over the generations, this can sometimes be generational, so we'll pick from a different host of examples. Sizzler
Free Platinum Sizzler. That's an interesting description.
is famously one of the best Pokemon of all time, and has been for quite some time. However, as long as it held this elite status, it has not always been so excellent. In fact, it was thoroughly middling for multiple generations, and was in fact a perfect example of the Flareon Theorem. Sizzler was catapulted to greatness in Generation 4, where it received just about everything that we associate with how good it is. Diamond and Pearl gave it U-turn, the Technician ability, reliable recovery in Roost.
I had completely forgot about this. Yeah, prior to Gen 4, Sizzler was not good. Like, it had great typing, don't get me wrong. Bug Steel is, in my opinion, one of the best typings in the game. As a fan of bug types, as you see in my streams with Miko, right? Like, yeah, no, he really didn't have that move pool.
And Physical Pursuit. Then Platinum came along and rocketed it to superstardom with the addition of Bullet Punch, making it by far the #1 most popular Pokemon in the metagame until after both Latias and Salamence had been banned, which was so far into the generation it wasn't long before Black and White came around. Platinum giving Sizzler superpower was highly significant as well, and Heart Gold and Soul Silver even gave Sizzler superb Bug Stab, which didn't force it to switch out in the form of Technician boosted Bug Bite. Sizzler never stopped, continuing its excellence in Gen 5 and beyond. But then you stop and ask yourself, Sizzler's been around since Generation 2, and if it got all these great tools in Gen 4, what was it like before? The answer, not good. Well, it wasn't terrible. It still had good stats, steel typing, and some intriguing moves, but it certainly wasn't commonly used, which was
No, it wasn't. Like, you could see a Sizzler, but there were just better things to use at those points in time.
In practice, it offered very little, and what it did offer was A, incredibly specific, and B, not very useful, let alone reliable. For all of Gens 2 and 3, and even in Gen 4 before Platinum gave it Bullet Punch, Sizzler wallowed in relative obscurity. Of course, players experimented with it, but such tests always resulted in abandonment upon realizing there was a good reason Sizzler didn't see use. It just didn't.
So the another thing to consider as well is the format. So Gen 2 was very bulky. Lugia is called the Great Wall for a reason. It is the Great Wall in Gen 2. You also had Snorlax, which is incredibly bulky. We didn't have Chestoresto specifically, but we did have Berry that cured sleep. It's like, you would rest, go to sleep, eat Berry, wake up, or even you could just snore it, right? You did have Ho-Oh, which was also incredibly defensive as well, just in a different way than Lugia was. Then we had, obviously, Raikou, Zapdos, big, heavy hitters, but Zapdos is still arguably still pretty bulky. So Gen 2 was pretty bulky. Sizzler doesn't necessarily have the full stat pool to make use of that, and it also doesn't have the move pool to crack any of those metagame threats. Remember, like, Celebi is still around at this point in Gen 2, depending on the format you play. Celebi is just nutty. But no, Gen 2 was very interesting, to say the least, because it debuted in Gen 2, it debuted in Johto. And then Gen 3, that one is a little fuzzier, but there was still the physical special. I do think Sizzler does have access to both stabs at this point in time, where such as Flareon did not, because moves were either coded as prior to Gen 4 as physical or special. Sorry, types prior to Gen 4 were physical or special, meaning that any fire move was always special prior to Gen 4. So that's why Flareon really didn't see usage till, like, Gen 4. So Sizzler was, yes, while it didn't have the move pool to really do anything, I think the metagame also should be considered as well in Gen 2 and 3.
Didn't have a good enough move pool. Swords Dance and High Attack, yeah, sure, but it didn't have the stabs to pull it off. It was mostly reliant on the paltry likes of Hidden Power Bug. Its coverage wasn't very strong either. In Gen 2, it was unable to hit steals at all, and Gen 3's Brick Break wasn't exactly the wall-shattering behemoth Sizzler needed to be. It needed more instant power because it was slow and not bulky enough to make up for it, especially since its only healing option came in the form of Gen 3's Morning Sun, which, being affected by weather, made it horrible in the permanent sand-infested metagame of Advance. Sizzler always seemed promising. In Gen 3, it could potentially use a Select Berry reversal set, unaffected by that same sand, unlike other users of the move like Heracross, and going down to 1 HP would also provide it a swarm boost for HP Bug. But far too many things had to go right for Sizzler to pull off this sweep with any semblance of reliability whatsoever. Maybe once in a while to catch someone off guard, maybe if you could somehow remove all of the flying types and Gengar that completely destroyed it. Sizzler's only real niches before Bullet Punch were a different kind of BP, that being Baton Pass, where it could hand off Swords Dance, Agility, or Iron Defense to Pokemon that were more capable of using the boost, because Sizzler itself certainly wasn't much of a threat even with them, and that really just speaks to the power of Baton Pass. Before Sizzler was the Sizzler we all know today, it was one of the most frustrating cases of wasted potential thanks to a great attack stat and intriguing typing held back by a complete lack of threatening moves, thereby making it a perfect example of the Flareon Theorem.
Right. No, Sizzler got really good. It also is an amazing stat block as well. If we look at Sizzler here, I mean, it's Bug Steel. It has one weakness in Fire, which is a 4x. But everything else, I mean, sure, 65 speed, whatever, if you're running Bullet Punch, which moves into the Flareon Theorem, but 70 HP off of 100 defense and 80 special defense. It's bulky, but it's not the bulkiest, if that makes sense. Like, it has a good degree of bulk, and it has a good defensive typing, but it needed the moves to help propel it forward.
The category of bland Pokemon may seem a bit vague, but the basic idea behind this placement is that there are far too many Pokemon that could qualify for the Flareon Theorem and tend to share the same fundamental reason for what makes their move pool lacking. So we've decided to group them together. We've considered several bland Pokemon in the Bastiodon Theorem, so we won't rehash them too much, but here's the gist. The reason Pokemon like Bastiodon and Dusknoir, i.e. slow bulky walls, are completely terrible, as opposed to other slow bulky walls like Toxapex and Alola Mola, which have been elite forever, is their lack of move pool. Of course, there are other differences like their typing and abilities, but Bastiodon and Noir's problem isn't necessarily getting on the field. It's making something happen when they do get on the field. They don't have the insanely spammable, universally crippling knockoff, nor do they fortify their own switching ability with reliable recovery, or support their team through Heal Bell or Wish, or anything of the sort. Their move pools are not necessarily bad, but far too generic and unremarkable for what these Pokemon bring to the table otherwise. The issue does not just apply to slow, bulky walls either. Many offensive Pokemon are similarly plagued. Just look at Regieleki, poised to deal utterly obscene amounts of electric damage, but reduced to a more or less wasted team slot because it is unable to damage ground types. Regieleki's move pool itself isn't bad, as Rapid Spin and Dual Screens off.
As someone that used Regieleki during Sword and Shield VGC, what I did play of it, like, Regieleki does one thing. What do you do? Thunderbolt. What do you do? Thunder. And there's like two other moves that you can slot in. I think one is like Volt Switch or something like that. What do you do once the next Excadrill comes in? What do you do when a Garchomp comes in? He just sits there. What do you do when a ground type comes in? Well, like Flagon, what do you do then? Regieleki continues bouncing in place. Yeah, no, it's yeah, that is a prime example of this, yes.
That ridiculous speed stat has a ton of promise, but it's not a threatening Pokemon, and the support it brings isn't anywhere near essential enough to make it a good one either. Regieleki is an example of not just an offensive Pokemon which is left severely wanting for moves to actually make it threatening. If it existed in a generation with just hidden power and no other additions to its move pool, it'd likely be one of the most terrifying Pokemon around, but it's also an example of a Pokemon of a certain type held back by its inability to damage its resist. It's far from the only electric this applies to. See the sad story of of Luxray, but many other types are well known for this issue. Arguably the most significant is water. There are so many water types out there, and so many of them so excellent that there is never a shortage of competition.
Right.
Thus, one can't coast on just being a water type. If you're a generic water type without any significant distinguishing traits on top of that, a Pokemon like Luminion or pre-Drizzle Politoed and Pelipper, you will be amongst the most forgettable Pokemon there are. Grasses are similar. Their inherent traits may be good, but the likes of Maractus, Carnivine, and Meganium are never going to be seen over their competition. Of course, even more successful Pokemon can also be examples of the Flareon Theorem. Take Cresselia, a superb wall which is nevertheless constantly fighting its own pallid move pool. It is nearly impossible to directly threaten the opponent with it unless their team collapses to moves like Thunder Wave and Toxic in general. And Cress's recovery options are nightmarishly unreliable, either stuck with the 8 PP weather-affected Moonlight or Rest, which makes it even more passive than it already is.
Cress is definitely an interesting one because Cress does see a lot of play on Trick Room teams when it is available in VGC. Like, Cress has you do and thing. What else do I do? You do and thing.
To get a pass because its defensive profile is just that good, but make no mistake, in terms of Movepool, it is as bland as it gets. After so many examples of Pokemon held back by their lack of move pool, let's briefly shift course to illuminate the power of a good move pool. This is best illustrated by Pokemon which are not so impressive in and of themselves, but their move pool really elevates them. Like, yes, Mewtwo and Dialga and such having amazing move pools, but they also have absurd stats, so it's not quite the same.
Right.
The most obvious example is Smeargle, perfectly illustrating the power of the move pool better than arguably anything else. Its go-to strategies ever since Gen 2 have been those that are the most fundamentally powerful in the game, letting
Smeargle is also the reason that Dark Void got nerfed. Darkrai's signature move, his put double hit both on the opposing team, put him to sleep. That got nerfed because of Smeargle. So now Darkrai has to suffer because Smeargle was allowed to bring it in VGC. How about you just ban the move in VGC? It's simple as that.
Pulled them off in spite of its awful stats. So Sleep and either entry hazards or Baton Pass, the latter which Smeargle has been a significant contributor in getting banned. Clefable always seems to pop up in videos like this, but it very much applies. Clefable is of course a confluence of many different attributes, an absurdly good ability, a stat spread which winds up being just good enough, and the amazing typing that is Mono Fairy in Gen 6 and later. But its move pool is very much a part of what makes it so good, since those previous traits all let it get on the field. Once it's on the field, it's using its amazing move pool to make things happen, and it has no shortage of things to make it happen, as it is positively overflowing with incredible options. Clefable's support capabilities are the most immediately apparent: Stealth Rock, Knockoff, Encore, Thunder Wave, and 2 amazing healing abilities in Soft Boiled and Wish.
Yeah.
It is also so good to deal with so many different Pokemon because it has all the coverage in the world and also one of the best boosting options in Calm Mind. In more extreme examples, consider Mew and Deoxys speed and defense. Mew's base 100 stats across the board are impressive, especially in the first 4 generations, but the reason it finds itself uber in those generations is not because of its stats, it's because its move pool is almost Smeargle-esque. And
it's almost like because Mew can learn every move in the game, it has almost unlimited potential, and it has the necessary bulk as well as offenses in base 100, and even speed in base 100 everything to make it work. Mew is great. Like, it's obscene what you can end up doing with Mew. As well as the speed. Right? Garchomp is 2 points faster than Mew. Figure that out. Mew is 2 points slower than Garchomp. Garchomp is just that fast.
A Pokemon that's actually good in its own right, that's terrifying. If Smeargle boosted its stats, the threat came from it passing to something else. Mew could do that as well, but it could also just mess you up with the boost by itself, or it could become an impenetrable wall, or pretty much anything it sets its eye on. The specified Deoxys form have great stats for sure, but those stats are in service of their move pools, which pretty much means Stealth Rock and Spikes and Time. Yes, they can do other things, but the reason they have been repeatedly banned from OU is because they were too efficient simply at getting hazards hazards and denying setup from the opposition. Even Pokemon that simply attempt to be pale Deoxys imitations, like offensive lead Skarmory, have a niche based entirely on the strength of those moves. Moves so good they're worth sacrificing an entire Pokemon at the beginning of the match for. Finally, funnily enough, Cresselia also deserves a mention here. It doesn't usually use this move when acting as a wall, thanks to its counterintuitive self-sacrificial nature, though it's not to say it hasn't been used to decent effect, but Cress's access to Lunar Dance has provided it with an incredible, unique niche on hyper offense teams. Lunar Dance differs from Healing Wish in that it also restores the power points of a Pokemon's moves.
Oh!
It's absolutely enormous in supporting threats like Leaf Storm Superior, and especially Substitute Protect Suicune, which tend to run out of PP before they can fully finish the team off. Cresselia brings them back for another round of terror against a weakened team, which is as game-breaking as you get when it's often difficult enough for opposing teams to withstand such threats once. And of course, if the situations call for it, Cress can also revive other threats like Volcarona as well. Cress's niche really does revolve around Lunar Dance, which can be seen in the awkward stages when Cress first comes in, but isn't ready to sacrifice itself yet. It can struggle to make things happen despite attempts to do so through tactics like Trick, Thunder Wave, and Screens. Its niche really is just to sacrifice itself for a teammate, and what a move Lunar Dance is, letting one essentially play with two Suicunes or Volcaronas or whatever threat it is, and in doing so creating an entire niche of it on a Pokemon that otherwise struggles to accomplish much. Slack Off was introduced in Generation 3 and dished out to Pokemon known for their laziness. At first, it was just the signature move of the Slacking line, but in Generation 4, its distribution rightfully increased to including other such lovers of taking it a little too easy, like the Slowpoke family. Other recipients included the Hippowdon and Infernape line. Not immediately obvious choices, but pokes you could see using the move for sure. No new users of Slack Off were added until Generation 8, where Mr. Rhyme of all Pokemon received the move. Another choice which might seem unusual at first, but some good arguments for it could definitely be made, no problem. Then in Generation 9, the Skeledirge line and Bellybolt received the move.
I actually didn't know it was this rare of a move. I mean, yeah, the Slacking line got it initially, and yeah, then the Slowbo line got it. Totally made sense. I didn't realize that it wasn't until Mr. Rhyme that we got the next user of it, and then obviously Skeledirge came out. I see you, Iron Valiant. I see you. That's wild, actually.
Deal. Where is this going? Well, there's no issue with any of these Pokemon getting Slack Off in and of themselves, but when these Pokemon receive Slack Off, yet Snorlax still doesn't have it after all this time, then something is rotten in Dendemil Town. Snorlax is far and away the most famously lazy Pokemon of all time. It desires quite literally nothing more than to sleep and eat, not even caring if it blocks the road of passing trainers. This is a level of slackerdom that makes the main characters from Clerks look like highly motivated go-getters by comparison. The omission of Slack Off from Snorlax's Movepool is not just a design problem. It is one that completely wraps Lax's competitive viability. If Lax had this one addition to its Movepool, and let us take this time to remind you that this is a Pokemon that learns Psychic for some reason, amongst the many other bizarre options populating its Movepool, if Lax had this...
So, in regards to that, I actually have a valid input on that, actually. So, because Gen 1 was so weird and had... And I say weird in a positive manner, right? Because Gen 1 didn't have that many moves, that's why you have Persian learning like Thunderbolt. That's why you have Tauros learning like Blizzard and Fire Blast. That's why you have Lax learning Psychic, right? It's because Gen 1 had limited moves to go with, so Gen 1 Pokemon do have a lot of strange additions to their move pool that a lot of other Pokemon may not. Now, in regards to Snorlax not getting what do you call it? Blah, 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 blah. Not getting Slack Off, right? I bring you Point in Case. Giant Ice-type dragon with 2 giant fists, 1 made out of ice. Cannot learn Ice Punch. Not an Ice-type, has no arms. Little boy. Can learn Ice Punch. A lot of this is due to Pokemon just being weird with their balancing, and thus you do have little lore omissions like that. You do have omissions with, you know, things that logically wouldn't make sense, where Snorlax getting Slack Off. Okay, that would make sense logically, but unfortunately... stuff like this will go through the cracks and thus becomes meme fodder at that point. Rhydon can learn Surf? Yep, absolutely. Absolutely can. Once again, Gen 1 had a lack of moves, so a lot of things got stuff that don't quite make a whole lot of sense. That being said, we also have, what is it, the Snorlax meme, where it took 8 generations, but Snorlax finally stood up. You could argue, theoretically, that Snorlax doesn't get slack off because it spent 8 generations from laying down to actually standing up.
One move, which was seemingly designed with it in mind, it would be completely different. It's had longevity issues since Sand and Spike's dominated days of Gen 3. When you are the slowest Pokemon around and have nearly no resistances, in addition to staggering vulnerability to passive damage, you need to have a reliable method of healing yourself, not rest. Even when you are as bulky as Lax is. Here's just one example with Slack Off. Gen 3 Snorlax becomes a superb Zapdos answer, as opposed to being the easiest way to trick yourself into thinking you're not weak to Zapdos right before it bowls you over. Slack Off doesn't fundamentally solve every issue Snorlax has, but it does make it a much, much better Pokemon in every conceivable way. Simply having it in its move pool is better. It doesn't even have to actually include it in its moveset. The opponent having to take into consideration the fact that Snorlax can heal shapes both team building and in-battle decisions.
But he did heal. And back in Gen 7 VGC, the Recycle Snorlax was amazing. So, like, it did get an option, not quite recover, not quite slack off, don't get me wrong, but it did get an option in Gen 7 where a lot of people, including me at one point, were running Recycle Snorlax to get it's not Citrus Berry, it's the one after that, right? Not pinch berries, that's not the word. Like the HP berries, but you have to have the beneficial nature, else it confuses you. Those ones, right? The big HP berries. You were just recycling that left and right, and this Snorlax became nigh unkillable in certain circumstances.
Comically deep as Snorlax's move pool is, most of these options don't actually do much of anything for it. Yeah, while Gen 8 gave Snorlax Hydro Pump. Now that's not totally useless. It's just missing the one move it really, really needs.
It gets Hydro Pump. There he is.
And finally, the Pokemon this theorem is named for. Okay, Flareon isn't an amazing Pokemon to begin with. Its flaws of lackluster speed, poor physical bulk, and weaknesses to common moves are incredibly easy to exploit without thinking twice about it. However, Flareon's also got some cool stuff going for it. Its defensive profile actually isn't bad. Wish is always a great move, and base 110 special defense can do solid things. Especially defensive fire types have had solid niches across many a metagame. What really stands out about Flareon, though, is that gigantic base 130 attack stat. That's the same as the monstrous Garchomp. This goes with Fire Stab, one of the scariest offensive types in the game. This fire typing also means Flareon is a physical attacker completely unafraid of being burned. In fact, its amazing Flash Fire ability means it welcomes being hit by a Will-O-Wisp or Lava Plume or whatever other fire move, as in addition to the excellent utility of being completely immune to fire, being hit by those moves actually powers up Flareon's own fire moves even more. Sure, Flareon's not that fast, but most walls are going to be slower, so it can be an excellent lower tier wall breaker. Not much is going to want to switch into that Flare Blitz. No. Oh right, Flareon, despite being a physically oriented fire type that literally has fire inside of it and has flare in its name, is unable to learn a move which involves it cloaking itself in fire and charging at the opponent. That makes total sense. Okay, Flareon actually did finally learn Flare Blitz in Gen 6, but at that point, Power Creep was too strong for it to really make any use of it. Had it had the moves in Gens 4 and 5 like it should have all along, its competitive career would have been very different, like an NU style Arcanine or Entei, except much, much stronger. With Fire Fang as its best physical fire stab though, Banded Flareon was pretty much the least scary thing in the world. What makes this particularly cruel is that in Platinum, each of the original evolutions got a cool new move. Vaporeon got Muddy Water, Jolteon got Discharge, and Flareon got Lava Plume. Yes, they're thematically linked via their 30% secondary effect, but was that really worth depriving Flareon of a move it so desperately needed and should have already had in Diamond and Pearl?
So it feels like they were actually not giving Flareon it because they thought it might have been a threat, right? Like why Garchomp hasn't gotten Dragon Dance, right? Where reasonably anyone else would just run Swords Dance, right? So by the time Flareon got it, by the time they decided, oh, this isn't going to be a problem, right? I mean, it was already too late. I mean, Gen 6, Power Creep had already just crept it out of any logical tier with any reasonable skill level, right? I'm not saying it's a bad Pokemon. There's technically no bad Pokemon. It's just a matter of what your team is and how high your skill ceiling is. I mean, that's all it comes down to, is just it's a game of skill and a game of chance, depending on what moves you use as well, right? Like, Thunder Wave. Thunder Miss. That's the one. But like, yeah, it got the right move, but it was too late for it to actually be impactful in any way, shape, or form. By the time we got it, it's like, well, who cares?
If it was, could it really not have been amended in Heart Gold and Soul Silver? Apparently not. Instead, Flareon was mocked with another move that, like Flare Blitz, was outstanding, just not what Flareon needed. This time around, it was Heal Bell. Wish, Lava Plume, Heal Bell. Defensive Flareon is an interesting Pokemon for sure, but it shouldn't have come at the expense of it doing what it was meant to.
No.
Dishing out Flare Blitz is exactly as strong as Garchomp's Outrage. Funnily enough, the exact same thing applied to Entei before the event towards the tail end of Heart Gold and Soul Silver. It too was a fire type with a high attack stat that lacked any usable physical fire sap and wasn't very good at all as a result. Of course, it then did go on to get Flare Blitz and carve out an excellent niche for itself. It even got Sacred Fire in the same generation Flareon finally got Flare Blitz.
Wild,
just to rub
yeah.
further burning salt in the already searing wound. Justice for Flareon. And
Like, yeah, no, fucking Entei got fucking Sacred Fire. It's wild. Honestly, Entei is probably the most underrated of the three doggos from Gen 2. Even though he's the one that literally had Pokemon the third movie, like, as he was the main Pokemon of Pokemon the third movie. Man, I remember that shit was new. I remember when that shit was like theatrical, like in theaters. That was wild. But yeah, the promo Entei card, you know what I'm talking about, right? The special promo foil Entei. Yeah! Entei doesn't look as cool. I mean, I beg to differ. I mean, Entei could have a lot going for it. He just has a weird move pool. And plus, like Suicune's got Bulky Water archetype nailed down. Raikou has a lot going for it and a lot of power and a really good offensive typing in electric and really good stats to boot and speed. So it's really hard for Entei to keep up. Man, I really want to go through Gen 2 Pokemon again.
that's it. Obviously, you can have a great move pool and still not succeed, as Snorlax is not exactly lacking in options, yet it still lacks what it really needs. It goes to show just how important move pools are. It might seem obvious, but you can hit the field as much as you want. Without the moves to make something happen once you do, you're out of luck. Thanks for watching, everyone. And as always, if you like the video and you want to see more, be sure to subscribe to False Swipe Gaming for more weekly Pokemon content. And in the comments, I want to know, what do you think about the Flareon Theorem? What other Pokemon would you have put on this list? Whatever it is, let me know in the comments. Also, thank you so much to our patrons for continued support of our videos. And thank you to everyone else watching as well.
I mean, it's a good video. I absolutely love False Swipes content. If you look at this video and you're like, man, he puts out a lot of cool Pokemon content, absolutely recommend you going over. Like, absolutely just legendary creator, legendary team making these.
And follow my crew on these social media platforms. And that's all I got. See you next time, everyone.
Yep, I love this video. And we will see you in the next theorem, as I love really dissecting these and going into them. I think you bring a lot of the good things to the table with you and your team. Excellent Pokemon videos always. Keep up the awesome work. BK2. Yeah, no, the gold BK kids. Oh, again, I remember that. That's a core memory unlocked. But yeah, more False Swipe at some point. Absolutely just awesome videos. Awesome as always. They're always interesting to see. And even then, things that I haven't considered in Pokemon, or maybe reinforces some things that I have considered, or things that I did know, right? Very interesting all around.